Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jenny Zell, and I'm the moderator of today's webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and it will be sent out after the webinar is over. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end with our speakers, so if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to add them to the chat box as we go along. Today's speakers are Stefan Schinkel, Chief Sales Officer, and Will Ezel, Co-founder and Chief Technology Officer for dotCMS. And with that, I'd like to pass over to you, Stefan.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. For those who attended our spring webinar, may remember this slide. And yeah, what an interesting 6 months we had. We've really seen a lot of companies accelerating their digital transformation, and the data speaks very clear, and there is a lot of data actually available, and I just wanted to share two data points with you that I really think stand out. First of all, tremendous shift in behavior. Again, this is U.S. consumer data, but this is a global trend. You see significant digital adoption across multiple industry, right? So really the acceleration of digital transformation is clearly visible. The second one is distributed workforce. We talked about this in April. People working from home, huge spikes before and during COVID. There's even more data available about people staying in distributed workforces, continue to work from home. And this is really important data for us as a product vendor for a platform where people collaborate and need to collaborate to create those digital experiences, right? So that is why we've been focusing for the last 6 months on three areas in our product, right? So first of all, NoCode, hugely important, make non-technical CMS users as independent as possible in their day-to-day operation, and conversely offload IT so they can focus on innovation. But it really drives time to value, time to market, and also total cost of ownership and return of investment. Product experience, like I said, collaborating in a product with distributed team members is usually important during your own activities and really creating those digital experiences. Super important. And then lastly, interoperability, right? Our customers build platforms where the CMS is only one portion of it, right? So building integrations with adjacent technologies quickly and secure is super important, right? So really making that easier than before is what it's all about. But before we go into what the team is planning to build in the remainder of this year and next year, Will, I would like to ask you to dive into what the team has been delivering in the last 6 months.
All right. Thanks, Stefan. We're excited about sharing what's coming, what we're working on here at dotCMS. But before I do that, I actually want to, I guess, pat ourselves on the back here and talk a little bit about what we've accomplished since spring. We were really pleased internally to go back and look at our spring outlook, which was a presentation we gave very similar to this one, that talked about a number of different objectives, and looking and seeing that we've actually achieved and delivered on those. It's very satisfying as the product owner here to talk about where we want to go and then working with the teams to actually get us there. So, delivered from our spring 2020 outlook, we've pushed out a lot of new releases of dotCMS and a lot of new capabilities. So, for example, dotCMS apps. right? So dotCMS apps is an internal, I guess you'd call it, app store. It's a easy way to add a UI on top of some of the integrations that we already have built into dotCMS, and kind of package those in a way that makes sense for end users to be able to come in and configure and get moving and actually using. So, right now we ship with 4 built-in apps, and this list is just going to grow. And it includes, using Amazon recognition to automatically tag your images, using Google Translation to provide machine-driven translations for content within a workflow. SAML. SAML's been a plugin that dotCMS has had, and we've brought that into the core so you can configure SAML on your given site. SAML single sign-on, and integrate that with ADFS or G Suite type single sign-on, and Okta, whatever, your third-party authentication and IDPs. And then finally, Edit Mode Anywhere was a plugin that we've talked about numerous times. It allows you to proxy and actually make your SPA, your dotCMS-driven SPA, manageable. Now that's built into the core and is available as an app. So we see the App Store, it's not quite a store, but this app screen, it's easy for partners to come in and develop apps as OSGI plugins that can add new capabilities. And we just see this list of available apps and integrations of dotCMS just growing. We've externalized Elasticsearch. This makes dotCMS more manageable. Basically, you can have a dotCMS instance that is ephemeral, basically short-lived, and can come up and come down and connect to an external Elasticsearch cluster, and allows for horizontal scaling of dotCMS. That's really valuable in modern orchestrators. Kubernetes can hook into Amazon's hosted Elasticsearch service and/or Elastic's cloud-based services. So you don't even need to run the Elasticsearch infrastructure anymore. You could just offload that to the cloud, and dotCMS can hook right into it. Jamstack support. So our new starter SPA is actually built using Next.js. Next.js is a React framework that delivers static sites and actually has a really cool capability to do static sites with background updating. So as sites are managed and changed in the background, Next.js can go and update the static delivery of that site. And right now we have our demo site running on Vercel's service. Vercel is the company behind Next.js, but it's completely static, and dotCMS is driving the look and feel of the pages that are being delivered there, as well as the layouts of the pages and all the navigations and routes as well. That's being driven off of our demo site currently. Visual browsing .assets. This sort of pushes dotCMS towards the DAM, or digital asset management tool, sort of lightweight DAM capabilities. You can just log into the back end and you can view content as a list, or you can view content in card views with thumbnails of the representative images of the assets that are in there. It's a nice, easy way to look and to find content that you want to reuse or manage within the tool itself. And then finally, fine-grained push publishing allows you to really lock down publishing into different environments. So you can have a authoring environment and a prod environment, and you can say, okay, this particular user can only publish news into the prod environment. Let's say you're a news company, or this individual can only publish pages into a new environment. The push publishing filters will allow you to set up that, and so will restrict what any given push publishing bundle will contain. It makes that whole process a bit more controllable and knowable. So looking forward, short term, for the remainder 2020 and beyond, to be honest, a little bit beyond, what we're working on is continuing to build out our headless and SPA tooling and our GraphQL tooling. So, dotCMS has a GraphQL endpoints. Now within GraphQL, we can deliver not only content via GraphQL, and content's all queryable and filterable via GraphQL, but we can also deliver navigation via GraphQL. We can also deliver page and page layout via GraphQL. And so what this means is we've had the Page API in dotCMS for years, and the Page API delivers not just the content as a service, but it delivers the layout of the service, the template configuration as a service, and even the navigation as a service. Now what we can do is deliver that via GraphQL, and if you're building a single page app, you don't need to go and pull down the Page API, which also includes a bunch of other data that you probably don't want. It's a very lightweight call in GraphQL, and you can say, okay, all I want to get is the layout. Maybe I just want to get the layout in the header row and the content block within that header row, and you can do that using, the GraphQL calls. Our new SPA ships with Apollo, and our Next.js site makes use of it. Apollo is the JavaScript GraphQL client and makes use of it. So it's a good demonstration of how you can connect to dotCMS, GraphQL, and get moving forward with it. And in terms of hybrid capability, so we're a hybrid CMS. We're not just a headless CMS. And what that hybrid capability allows us to do is not just deliver content as a service, but we can actually deliver rendered pages and components and content blocks as a service. And this can be done via GraphQL. So you can say via GraphQL, on this page, give me the right-hand side content block rendered, because I'm just going to drop the HTML into my single page app, or I'm going to use that HTML in another site that's going to consume that. Well, you can do that just with a single GraphQL call now, and that will come back from dotCMS rendered using the template and the containers, how they've been specified. It's a pretty powerful capability. It makes the GraphQL endpoint, I think, really interesting, not just for SPA usage, but also if you want to deliver, dotCMS could become a banner server, and you can use a GraphQL call to go and pull banners to be or intercedial interactive blocks and pull those back rendered and deliver those right into your HTML. Likewise, another hybrid capability is the ability to fire rules on the routes. So you can say, give me this particular page, and dotCMS has a rules engine, so you can build rules against it with geographic targeting. If user is in EU, has a particular browser type, or has anything in their request or within their session, or even a third-party cookie or something like that, you can fire those rules, and dotCMS will internally fire those rules and return a GraphQL response that's in response to those rules. So it allows for personalization even within the GraphQL API. So moving down the NoCode and SPA enablement and headless CMS route, another function feature that we're working on internally is the idea being able to create a page without having to first go and define a template, container, and content blocks in dotCMS. So here's the problem set that this is trying to solve. So you download dotCMS for the first time. You're a headless web dev. You're looking to use dotCMS for your content store, and dotCMS can do all that, and that's great. But then you want to play around with the Page API and being able to deliver not just content, but pages, layouts, navigation into your application. And so you say, okay, well, I'm going to build quote unquote a page in dotCMS, and I'm going to begin to manage content there. And you right click on the browser tree in dotCMS, and you say create new page, and the first thing it asks you for is a template. So you're a headless developer, and you say, I don't need a template. My template's in my components, and it's in my my React or Vue app or whatever I'm using, my Angular app that's consuming the content. And so you can't actually build that page. You have to actually go in and say, okay, well, I'm going to build a template. And you go to build a template, and when you add a template, the first thing it asks you is for a theme. Okay, so you don't have a theme. So now you need to have all of this theme code to be able to have a layoutable template. That theme code is a bunch of velocity and headers and footers and includes, and even though that's not delivered, well, it can be rendered and delivered headlessly, but you need that in dotCMS to kind of glue it together. And then you say, okay, so now I have my theme. Let me add a container, and you don't have any container. So you have to say, okay, well, what is a container? It's a content block. So you have to build out a container, and only then, once you've done all that work, can you deliver a headless route. And all of that work isn't really important to you in your single page app or in the consuming system, because the consuming system is actually going to be the thing laying it out and using the content and content as a service and the layout as a service to build what the output should look like. That's the problem set, right? And so the idea of the no-code route page builder is to allow the creation of pages in dotCMS without needing to first build the templates and containers. You know, the way that we plan to enable this is to deliver a system template and a system container in every dotCMS system, and that'll be within the dotCMS code base, and it'll have certain properties. Like, so for example, the system container will automatically include a generic layout for every content type that you have defined in your dotCMS, and so you can add content of any type. And the system template will automatically have a system theme, and you'll be able to just use that to build new pages. So what that means is now the headless developer can say, okay, I want to play around with the route page builder in dotCMS, right clicks, adds a new page, and instantly they're taken into edit mode. Now granted, it'll look like a wireframe for the most part, but it will show and allow the editor to begin to add content to different areas, to the header, to the footer, to say, I want to show the header or footer, drag and drop content, make that content and layout editable, and deliver that into your, third-party SPA or application. It's an important component, here future forward for when dotCMS is in a world where dotCMS isn't in charge of the rendering. We're just delivering the content, maybe the layout, some of the assets. It allows a very quick time to delivery if that's the pattern of your content deployment and your application development. So moving on to some technical improvements that we're making, and if you're less interested in this, you can just do other things or put me in the background while I drone on these technical slides, because this excites me. The first thing I want to talk about is we're updating the backend UI to use Angular 10. It was previously on Angular 7. Angular 10 has, just like every update, smaller, lighter, faster. I mean, they've said that for years, but truly, our developers got done, with the initial upgrade, and we saw a 40% size reduction in the JavaScript files. And what that means is the UI will load faster, and it's been more optimized. We're also updating our included JavaScript libraries. So, for example, I think we ship with Ace Editor for code editing. Moving forward, we're incorporating an Angular component for VS Code. VS Code's Microsoft's the de facto go-to tool for web developers writing code. It's a pretty slick web component. You can actually enable so many features of it. VS Code, we're stripping it down so it just looks like a nice sort of code editor. But it's a neat component to bring into the system. We're also updating our widget tool set to Prime and G10, and we're just continuing to push forward with our UI design system and setting up storybooks for our design system so we can test CSS and different changes across the entirety of the UI and the UI components. So that's a nice piece coming within the next couple months here, is updating the back end to Angular 10. Another exciting development, and again, this is from a sort of an infrastructure management perspective, is enabling ARM support for dotCMS and specifically for the dotCMS Docker container. ARM is a competing chipset with Intel, and right now ARM is kicking the snot out of Intel. Number one, ARM powers the entire mobile world, from Android, Apple. They're all based on the ARM chipset. Apple's moving all of their hardware, including MacBooks, to the ARM chipset. And ARM just keeps innovating. It's much lighter in terms of energy consumption from the Intel chipset, and they've been able to kind of innovate and out-innovate, Intel and AMD here. So what ARM support for dotCMS means is that specifically AWS has recently introduced M6G and T4G instances that are based on the ARM architecture. And those instances in testing that has been done have shown to be 48%, well, it says it in the slide, 48% more affordable at similar performance points. And for example, in AWS, when you fire up let's say it's a M5 large, what it has two processors, or it says it has two processors, what you're really getting there, and it's an Intel chipset, what you're really getting there is those processors are hyper-threaded processors, so they're really just threads. You could only get one core that has two threads. Still, there can be contention there on the processor. When you fire up a M6G large with two processors, you're actually getting two ARM processors. And the performance difference and the performance gains are really significant. And you can use smaller instance sizes for faster performance. So I'm excited about this. You know, when you install dotCMS and even the dotCMS container, what we're doing is we're now building, and this is going to be in the next release of dotCMS, what's called multi-arch or multi-architecture Docker images. So when you say Docker run dotCMS, if you're running on an ARM server, Docker will go and pull down the ARM version of the dotCMS image and run that. And if you're on the Intel, it'll go and pull down the Intel image and run that. What ARM support means, it really means you can run dotCMS now in the cloud, even locally, using less resources on an ARM chipset. Talking a little bit about what might be considered a housekeeping change is the idea of changing our versioning system in dotCMS. dotCMS has been semantically versioned, a rough approximation of semantically versioned since its inception. What we're moving to is the idea of calendar versioning, or Calver, to version our dotCMSs. So if you've been paying attention, we're coming out with many more releases. Our release cycle is 3 to 4 weeks, and we're putting out releases. And what that means is that the actual release number in the release version number is much less important than it used to be. And what Calver, or calendar versioning, gives us is the ability to not really worry about the release number. It really gives us, when we're supporting a customer, to say, oh, what version are you on? Oh, you're on 17.602, well, you're 3 to 4 years out of date. We really have to get you upgraded. It's an instant answer for how old is the version of dotCMS that you're running, how far out of date that is. So what we plan to do, and I've seen questions, oh, what version should we run of dotCMS? And what we plan to do is to provide LTS version. So what an LTS version will be a long-term supported version that will be supported for up to a year after their release. So we plan to put out about two LTS versions a year. Customers that are okay running LTS version, maybe the LTS version doesn't have the latest features of the release version, but if a customer is okay running an LTS, or actually wants to run the LTS version, that's fine. We'll support that and backport fixes, and any issues that come up with the LTS version, will backport fixes into that. For customers who are, let's say you're in an implementation, or there's a new feature that's come out in dotCMS that you want to take advantage of, you can run the release version. Potentially once you've launched or gone live, you can say, what we're going to do is stick on an LTS version here from future forward. So getting us out of the business of managing versions and really giving us insight into how old technically, any given dotCMS installation is. Right, and finally, the slide that should be in every roadmap presentation I do, which is the idea of tackling the technical debt in dotCMS. So dotCMS has been around as a system, been around for 15 years now. There's technical debt in dotCMS. There's old libraries that need to be updated. The content model can be improved, simplifying and removing some table constraints that have been built into dotCMS over the years, and really focusing our efforts, and this is, just from a planning perspective, we're really focusing our efforts on PostgreSQL. PostgreSQL drives the dotCMS cloud. I don't know if everyone saw that, but we've deprecated the MySQL support in dotCMS. We didn't feel the need to be able to support two open source databases and really want to encourage everyone. I mean, we are still supporting Oracle and MS SQL and plan to do so for the foreseeable future, so there's no issues there. But PostgreSQL is what we're focusing on as a company. It's scalable. All the cloud providers offer it just as managed services, and it's a really nice tool. And then continuing the UI migration to Angular. And so we're just going component by component in the system and angularizing the different tool sets. I think we're focusing on templates and the template screen and how to build templates in dotCMS currently. And that's just going to continue from down the site browser and into the different components that make up dotCMS. I'd like to turn our attention now to an important initiative in dotCMS for the new year and here moving forward, which is improving the editor experience within the tool. Since the beginning of time, really, dotCMS has shipped with WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. And we've shipped with TinyMCE for years and years. Now, TinyMCE is great. It's configurable. We've exposed that configuration now at the field level. It can all be done from the UI, so that's all well and good. But the problem with TinyMCE is it wants to own all the HTML that it outputs. And it wants that to be just a big clump of HTML. And the problem with that is that doesn't really work that well in the headless space. So what we're looking at moving to, not even moving because I think TinyMCE is not going anywhere, but in adding to dotCMS is the idea of what's called a block-style WYSIWYG. And a block-style WYSIWYG is a new type of WYSIWYG that produces much more web-friendly output than a traditional HTML, I'm emulating front page type WYSIWYG that really represents the origins of TinyMCE. Block-style WYSIWYG just out of the box comes with less formatting options, so it's not like a kitchen sink style WYSIWYG, but it produces much more controlled output. That output is actually available with the block-style WYSIWYGs as JSON itself. So it will output these chunks or blocks of formatted text in HTML as JSON objects themselves. It also allows for these blocks to be within the block-style WYSIWYG to be moved up and down or reordered very, very easily, and enables the idea of what many people call stories within a content management system. Now, these stories think of a story as a traditional blog type posting. In a traditional blog type posting, you want to post content, let's say a paragraph or two of teaser content, and then you want to include and inject right in the middle of that story embed really a YouTube video. Potentially that YouTube video is coming from a container inside dotCMS. Maybe you want to inject a photo gallery into the middle of that block, and then after that photo gallery, you want to include other, the remainder of the article. And it's the idea of being able to kind of block format. So the first paragraph would be a block, the YouTube video would be a block, the photo gallery could be another block, and then the remainder of the article can be another block. And those blocks can be reordered and managed almost completely separately. It's very much like the idea of our containers, but it's just being able to drop a container within a different area of the WYSIWYG. It's a very powerful, and very common use case in the web. And to be able to output that and output the result of that as JSON makes it very friendly for a headless use. Some block editors even allow you to do things like output that as Markdown, and so they'll automatically transform HTML to Markdown, and this is what we're looking at enabling in dotCMS. There are block editors as well that also allow for collaborative editing, and this is the Google Docs style. I'm editing this paragraph and someone else is editing another paragraph, and that's something that we're looking more collaborative tools within dotCMS. It's something that we're looking at enabling, and in order to enable those types of collaborative tools is going to take another really another infrastructure piece in dotCMS, which takes me to my next slide, which is deeper integration with Redis. Now, Redis is it's traditionally thought of as a caching store. It's a key value or NoSQL database, but Redis has a really nice pub/sub or publish subscriber mechanism in it, very much like a kind of a lightweight Kafka. And many companies use Redis to provide real-time collaboration. For example, Slack, when you join a channel, what's going on there is it's going to Redis and pulling back the comments from that channel, or you see someone typing in the channel, it says someone's typing, that's Redis providing that as an event coming out of the pub/sub framework for Redis. So bringing Redis into dotCMS, Redis is already part of dotCMS in a certain way. It drives a caching layer for us in some installations, but bringing that on and enabling the pub/sub capabilities within dotCMS is really going to allow us to provide a new level of interactivity and collaboration within the tool itself, right? And the idea, I think, is Redis becomes part of our stack, like Elasticsearch is part of our stack, and Redis is provided in the cloud. There's managed Redis solutions at every major cloud provider, but Redis coming into our stack is just going to allow a much more collaborative experience and interactive experience within dotCMS. Another sort of long-standing piece that we're going to tackle in 2021 is moving dotCMS to Java 11 or greater. Java 11 is the LTS or long-term supported version of Java, but really in enabling dotCMS to run on 11, we probably will enable it just to run on any more modern version of Java. Right now we're on Java 8 and just been hesitant to move to Java 11 because it touches a lot of different components in dotCMS, which makes upgrading more difficult for people who rely on them, and we've been hesitant to touch it because it adds complexity to upgrades. But Java 11 has gotten so good, there's free performance improvements in these newer Javas that they use much less memory just by default. Java 11 has new garbage collection algorithms that we can leverage in order to run dotCMS on really large instances. If we wanted to run dotCMS on an app server that has 128 gigs of memory, just basically unlocking a whole new level of dotCMS performance. As a final note, talking about the move to Java 11 and the upgradability, if you're running dotCMS containerized, this should be almost transparent to you, and the move to Java 11 should be a much smoother transition versus running dotCMS closer to the metal. So, we really see, the move to our containers, if you're running dotCMS containerized, as I think we'd recommend now in any current architecture, then, this is going to be a much smoother transition. So let's take a look at a little bit of a longer-term perspective for dotCMS. This slide here suggests second half 2021, but these developments that we're going to be talking about actually are beyond conception and already in progress in certain parts of them. Part of their epics are already in progress in various future releases of dotCMS. And the first one, and the most important one, I think, is dotCMS CI/CD enablement. And let me be clear what, in our vision, a CI/CD enabled CMS means. In our vision, a CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, enabled CMS means that the configuration files to set up any given CMS environment lives in Git. This means in dotCMS land, this means, for example, the host definitions are in Git, the content types are in Git, the workflows are in Git, potentially some assets and files that make up key components in dotCMS are in Git, things like themes, things like maybe container files, some template files. Those live in a, maybe widget code, for example, is another example. Those live in Git, and those are, versioned. The idea is that they get checked into Git and then pushed into dotCMS, which then updates the model and does the work there. All of that lives in Git. But I think the important distinction is that in dotCMS CI/CD, content still lives in the cloud, right? dotCMS wants to be able to deliver, millions of content objects. And there's no way to have a Git repo that can hold millions of content objects with multiple binary fields, potentially digital assets, all of that content needs to live in the cloud. And so the idea, I think, for dotCMS CI/CD is to really separate the idea of configuration from the idea of content, and to be able to enable large-scale content stores in the cloud. These are stores that can deliver websites worldwide, news site, where there's just a lot of content that's being delivered and still be easily configured and manageable by having the configurations in Git. We see content being fed from one environment to another or promoted through environments using APIs, not using, and APIs even such as push publishing, not using storing that content in Git, because that can just overwhelm any large-scale Git repo. We also see developing, and we've already started this work here, a command line client to interact with a dotCMS installation. So, the idea for the command line client is to enable scripting. So you can say, okay, I want to pull all the content type definitions out of my, my development dotCMS instance, or I want to push those same definitions to another dotCMS instance. And the command line client would interact with dotCMS through the dotCMS APIs to be able to extract and or move configuration between the different dotCMS environments. The idea of pushing, if content is stored in the cloud, the idea of pushing content at that point potentially becomes the idea of pushing not content but pointers to the content where that content lives in the cloud, and making bundles that much smaller within dotCMS, and really enabling a dotCMS environment to be set up with almost the only thing it would be sharing would be a database and content. Let's say it's a digital asset. Let's say it's a video. The pointer would get pushed to the dotCMS environment. dotCMS would say, okay, when that URL or that API is called to serve that video, dotCMS would retrieve that video from the cloud, cache it locally, and be able to distribute that without necessarily needing a shared network file store. So the idea is really cloud-enabled content with Git-enabled configuration. And that's where we're moving with regard to our CI/CD enablement. We're working towards that really with every release. But we're real excited because I think that's the right division between using pure Git-backed storage, where everything, including content, is stored in Git. That's just not going to be scalable future forward. And then finally, our content model. We have rich, robust content modeling tools in dotCMS, but one thing that we see again and again with regard to our content model is should I use tags? Should I use categories? They each have pros and cons, and I think where we see this going is creating this idea of what we're calling tagagories, right? So a tagagory, bringing together the best of what categories can offer in dotCMS with the idea of the ease of use and searchability of tags. It's really a web-friendly taxonomy. It's how I think content is intended to be used and categorized within any large-scale sites that are delivering a lot of content. You actually want to use tags in order to make content findable, but you actually need those tags to be in some sort of taxonomy, so you're not just searching a big fat generic tag cloud when you're pulling a list of products. And we see this being unified in the UI as well, really redoing the tag and category controls, and even driving personalization, the idea of tagagories. So there's more to come here. This is a part of a roadmap item on GitHub, but just in terms of the taxonomy within dotCMS, enabling the idea of tagagories, the idea that these also can be content, which can have custom properties and be used in different ways, I think is a really powerful one. And so that's it, everyone. I thank you for your time, and I hope you saw things that interest you, and we are here for questions. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
We're going to open up for questions now.